I'm Julie Herman of Jaybird Quilts and Lazy Girl Designs, and welcome to the Cuppa Tea video tutorial series. This series of videos will be available ongoing to help assist you in making your very own Cuppa Tea quilt. In today's video, I'm going to take you through step-by-step making one block. It is block 11, which is called Vanilla Tea. You can be found on page 41 in your book. And so I'm going to walk you through step-by-step that block. And in the fall, we're going to have a sew-along where I will walk you through all of the blocks. If you have not yet signed up for that, you can do so at the link posted in the caption below. So let's get started on block 11. The 12 main blocks for Cuppa Tea are put together in a 9 patch. Right here in front of you, as an example, I have block 11. I've gone ahead and made my 4-step lazy angle units, my companion block, and then I have 4 background squares to fill it in. And now I'll show you how I made them. Block 11, Vanilla Tea, is a 4-step block. So I've already shown you how we make our simpler blocks, our 2-step and our 3-step, and we've continued to build our skill set and started some 4-step blocks, and this is another 4-step block. So what does that mean? It means we are going to first start with an A and a B, and we're going to turn them into a block. We're going to recut it using our jumbo lazy angle ruler. We're going to add another B, and then another B, and another B. And then we are going to combine that with some basic squares as well as a companion block to create our entire block. So let's head on over to the machine to get started sewing. First step in making any lazy angle block is sewing our A to our B. We are going to align them just as we have with all of the other blocks, with our dog ears coming off up here and down here. And our scant 1/4 inch should be from valley to valley so that when we open this up, we still have a 5.5 inch block. Now I'm going to take these 4 blocks and head on over to press them and recut them so that I can put the next piece on. Now that I have sewn these, it is time to go ahead and press them so that I can recut them following the steps in the pattern. I'm going to begin by finger pressing them open. And I'm just going to press. As I always say, pressing is up and down. Ironing is moving your iron. We don't want to iron. We have bias seams here. We just want to go up and down and press. I like to press them open. Find they lay nice and flat that way. The next step here is we need to recut this so that we can add our next piece. I always suggest you follow the diagrams in the book, and the directions for this one are on page 42. Another helpful thing can be to take the piece that you know comes next and lay it on top of one of them. And that way, when you take your ruler and your block, say for instance, you had your block like this, you'd be like, well, that doesn't match that. I'm not going to end up with the right thing. It's kind of your double check that that's not what I want to be cutting off. In this case, we want to be cutting off this portion of the block so that we can add our next left B. So I'm going to line up my 5.5 solid lines around the block, and there is a dashed line up here, and where that corner of the dashed line is should line up on this seam, as well as the dashed line right near the 5.5 should also line up on that seam. So you have 1, 2 checks, 3, 4. And if they don't all 4 line up, it's a good opportunity to assess, figure out, did you sew this seam wrong? Did you cut something wrong? If it's off by a tiny bit, it's something that you might be able to fix. If it's off by a lot, it might be cause to pause and correct things. So I'm just going to trim that off. There we go. That'll match up perfectly with those. So I'm going to cut the rest of them as well in the same manner. And I am again using my Sew Tights magnetic cutting system. I find it's really helpful in making sure that my jumbo lazy angle doesn't move, especially when you're recutting a block and you already have a seam. There's more layers there, and so there's more tendency for things to slip, and accuracy really matters here. So using the magnetic cutting system, I have found really helps me to get nice, accurate blocks. And time to cut that last one. Then I'll head back over to the machine to sew those next pieces on. Now that I have completed sewing the second B piece on, it is time again to press this seam open so that I can go recut my block. Again, we just want to press, not iron, just up and down. We're now in the middle of page 42, and we need to go ahead and recut this again to be able to add the next piece. And so we want to recut it following our diagram to a right A so that we'll be able to add a right B in the next step. And let me show you where that is going to go. It's right up there. So I'm going to follow similar steps to what I did in the last recutting. I'm going to line up my 5.5, my 5.5. That's my first double check. And my second double check is this dashed line near the 5.5 is going to line up on that seam, and this dashed vertical line and horizontal line should line up right on that point. So there's lots of double checks to myself, so I'm going to line that up and line that up, and my 5.5 lines up. Again, I'm going to use my magnets because with those nothing's going to move, so I know that my cut's going to be in the right place. I'm just going to repeat that for all four. Now I'm going to head back on over to the machine to sew those together. And again, we're going to repeat. We're going to open these seams and press them so that we can do our final recutting of our block for making this 4-step block. I know sometimes it can feel like there is a lot of sewing and cutting and sewing and cutting, and there is with this technique, but this is one of the most accurate ways to get blocks that look like this. The other methods involve templates, doing foundation paper piecing, and I really just prefer to rotary cut things from strips than use templates that can only be used for one thing or do foundation paper piecing. So we have just completed page 42 and we're now on the top of 43. And in order to cut the block so that we can put this here, we actually need to do our next recutting from the back. So we are going to take our blocks and our landmarks here. We have a few of them. Our 5.5, it's our standard landmark. Our mark here is going to line up here. Our vertical and horizontal dash lines here are going to line up here. And then our dashed line here and here are going to line up at that point. And it's important to check those reference marks because they will determine the overall result of the block. It's actually more important down here, for instance, right now that that dashed line lines up on that point than my solid line lining up on my block. And I don't know if you can tell, but my block is not perfectly square at this point, and that happens because we are human and we are not perfect. And so I am going to be making sure that that, and that are where they need to be, because then my block is going to turn out how it needs to be. And I will show you how we're going to make it all come together. And I forgot to use my magnet on that one. Thankfully it did not slip, but I'm gonna go ahead and use my magnet on this one because I really do like having it. It's almost like an insurance policy. Just kind of helps to keep things, especially now the more layers. I find that I like to line it up instead of on the seam, on the fabric, so that I have as little wiggle room and movement as possible. Make sure everything is lined up right. So I'll show you what these turn out looking like is that. It's going to create a really cool, fun starburst block. So let's head back to the machine to sew our last B piece into place. The 12 main blocks for Cuppa Tea are put together in a 9 patch. Right here in front of you, as an example, I have block 11. I've gone ahead and made my 4-step lazy angle units, my companion block, and then I have 4 background squares to fill it in. 9 patches, generally speaking, pretty simple. Sew these 3, sew these 3, sew these 3, sew your rows, you're good to go. But here we have a few extra things to consider, and so I'm going to show you some tips to make sure that we don't lose our points that we've worked so hard to obtain up to this point. First thing that I'm going to show you is how we make sure that we line up this point to here and this point to here. And then I'm also going to show you, when sewing these together, how we maintain our points up here to make sure that when we eventually have our sashing go on, that we have the correct seam allowance. So let's head on over to the machine where I'll show you these tips. I'm over here at my machine and I have brought my block over here so that I don't mix anything up. And the first thing that I want to show you is how to line up these points. We could just put these right sides together, stick it through the machine, hope for the best. What I like to do though is I like to give myself as much chance as possible of getting those points to line up. And what I like to do is called the hang pin. So let me show you what that looks like. The hang pin is a technique where you are going to place a pin that is going to, as it sounds, hang in here, and then 2 other pins to help ensure alignment. So our first pin is going to come in from the wrong side, right at the point. And you're going to double check on the other side that it's coming through, and you see right where it wants to be. Then you are going to go in from the right side at the point of the other piece. Okay, and now you are going to put these 2 together and push the pin about halfway through. And you're going to leave it hanging there, hence the name hang pin. So it's just kind of hanging there. See the pin? It's just hanging there. Now, what we want to do is put a pin in either side to hold these in place so that we can take it to the machine. And what we want to make sure that we do is, see here, you can see I'm wiggling that pin up, down, right, left. We don't want to do that. We want to keep these nice and hugged together, and we want to make sure that our pin stays in nice and straight. And you can see right away that for whatever reason, when I sewed, that my green piece is not going to be flush up at the top of this other one here. And that's okay. Things happen. If it was flush, my points might not line up. And what I care about right now is that my points line up. So I'm simply going to take 2 other pins, and I'm going to place one here. And make sure that hang pin stays exactly where I want it. And I'm going to take my other pin and put it right here. So this is what it should look like. And then I'm going to take the hang pin out so that I have the ability to go to my machine. Now I could sew the length of this seam, but what if it's off? Then I have to take all the stitching out. So what I like to do is I like to sew about 1 inch, half an inch on either side, and double check and make sure everything is good. So I am going to lift my presser foot, move my little scrap piece out of the way there. And this is a place where a stiletto can be very helpful to keep and hold all those seams down. And I'm just going to simply stitch. And I'm going to do my best to make sure that my needle lands right at that intersection of those points. that pin out. Let's see how that looks. And that looks great. So you can see that by using the hang pin, these points line up really well to each other. So now that I have that in place, I can go ahead and sew the length of this seam. I'm just going to make sure to sew right on top of the stitching that I've already done. There we go, and I will repeat those steps to put the other piece on the side using the hang pin technique as well. The next thing that I want to show you is how to make sure that you preserve these points when sewing on your background squares to complete these rows. So if we sew this to this from this side, we can't see what's going on. We don't know what's underneath there. So I find it best to sew from this side. And then I can make sure when I am sewing my 1/4 inch that I can see that point and adjust things if needed to make sure that I don't lose it. Because when I'm on my other side, I don't have visibility. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I can make sure that this doesn't slide one way or the other, and that this stitching line comes so that when I have my 1/4 inch stitching line in this direction, it will land perfectly where I want it to on that seam. So let's see what that looks like. So there we go. So now we have preserved that point so that when we go to sew our sashing on, we will have a nice point there. So now when I go to sew this piece on, again, I don't want to sew with my background square on top. I want to flip and sew with my block on top so that I can see what's going on. Now this isn't always possible depending on the block layout and what's going on, but I always prioritize the pieced block or the most important pieced block or the one with the most points on top. There we go. So now I would go over to my iron and press these seams open. I'm just going to finger press them here at the machine so that I can show you what I would do next. We have this row and we have this row. So once I have all 3 of my rows done, imagine my top one's done, we're going to go ahead and sew our rows together. Now where these are, we're just going to match things up and pin. But here we have another point situation. So before I match up here or here, I'm going to go ahead and do another hang pin here, another just 1 inch of stitching, check, make sure my point is good. Once I know that it's good, I can go ahead, pin these locations, and sew the length of my seam at my machine. I hope you enjoyed this video on block 11 for the Cuppa Tea Quilt. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos. If you have any questions, you can ask those in the comments down below. And as I mentioned earlier, if you've not yet signed up for the sew along, information for the upcoming sew along for the Cuppa Tea Quilt this fall is in the caption below. We would love to have you sign up and look forward to having you join us and seeing what quilt you make.